thanks for having me, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the book. Just giving you a bit of an idea of who I am. So I'm a freelance designer working in London with a background in industrial design and UX. And I guess I've always looked at products as a sort of cross between digital and physical, and so I've been interested in the Internet of Things for quite a few years. And I was lucky enough to get involved in a book project for the last year, writing a few chapters for this book, Designing Connected Products, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the ideas in it. So I'll dive right in to, I guess, a bit of a broader thing view on IoT that I have that I think is interesting, and I'm not necessarily saying that all of these things are positive ideas, but it's just the kind of stuff that I think we might be seeing, right? So there's sort of 4 areas that I often think about. The first is sort of products with extended value propositions. So I often think of connectedness as a sort of similar shift to electricity, right? So it takes very simple products and electricity made them more convenient. So it took away a simple pain point like having to handle hot coals or something. And I think that's the kind of products that make a lot of sense in the IoT is when you take something like a body scale and you add a sort of enhancement like it's going to keep track of all your weight every time you weigh yourself on it, right? That's a really clever little enhancement. I think we'll see quite a bit of that, and I think that's the sort of kinds of products that make a lot of sense. A similar thing is, what Nest did with the smoke alarm, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a second as well. The next thing, I guess, is digital business models going into the physical world, which I think is sort of where things might get a bit scary. But I think, we sort of have to think about things like, what if we got a fridge for free because it's funded through advertising or through the data that the people that give us the fridge can mine from our behavior. I'm slightly sort of, not sure what to think of this, but I think that's the sort of type of stuff we'll see more of. Or things where you pay for much more granular usage and actual use. So, the idea that you go into a Starbucks and you get your receipt at the end for the coffee that you have and for the time that you actually spend using their heating and their chairs. And some of this starts to happen in the more commercial end of the scale, right? And sort of commercial real estate, where some of this stuff starts to happen, where sensors in chairs can now start to monitor, how many people have you actually. How should we actually charge you for this usage of the space? Or in entertainment, so the latest Xbox has a camera and so you can see and track who's in the living room. And part of what Microsoft talks about there, what this will enable is a way to actually charge for movies, for example, that you watch based on how many people are actually in the room watching them. Which is sort of, has 2 sides to the coin, I guess. Because if you're alone, arguably it's cheaper. But, and I also think there'll be ways people will start to fool and trick these systems. But it's the kind of stuff I think we'll see more of. And then, of course, service companies going into physical products. So there was a company in London called One Fine Stays, for example. It's a sort of posher version of Airbnb. And what they're building a team at the moment, aside from the sort of purely digital service model, they're actually working on a hardware product, which is a connected lock, because of course it saves their customers a massive pain point, which is when you're renting out your flat to somebody else, you have to work out how to handle the key. And so if they're building a physical connected lock that they can give their customers, that key just becomes an email that you send, and then it's only valid for the 2 days that you've actually rented out your flat. And you see, and maybe what you've seen recently also is Airbnb actually have acquired a Russian industrial design firm, which is a sort of slightly odd thing to think about first. Why would Airbnb need an industrial design firm, right? But actually, when you think about it more, it's in this term, you sort of start to think, well, actually, there is possibly an interesting future of Airbnb creating physical products. Or another example is Nespresso. So the business machines, some of the business machines they release now actually have SIM cards and use cellular connectivity to report back to the system. Much like a Tesla, I guess. And so what's interesting there is that, similar to what you said earlier, Nespresso is really just a coffee service that happens to make a coffee machine, right? But really, what they want to sell you is coffee. And I think we'll see more of these shifts of products to services, and therefore enabled through connected products like this. So part of what this means is that Nespresso can, of course, use analytics to a much greater degree than they could before, right? Because they can understand much more about your coffee consumption. They can send an engineer to your office to fix the machine before you know it's even broken. And there's again this sort of flip side to this, because if you read about this machine, this is a coffee machine that comes with a privacy policy. And I don't know how many machines we had before that, but you need to sign a privacy policy. And I think we're also going to see more completely new kinds of products. I'm really fascinated by Amazon's approach to this, because I think they're very good at experimenting at the moment. I don't think there's a lot of criticism that they get for sort of, what's this product about? But I think, in my view, what they're really doing is they're actually just experimenting on quite a big scale of what can we do. And if you're unfamiliar with these products, you should check them out. So the Amazon Echo is this thing that lives in the entire home, and it uses voice interaction to literally sort of almost do anything, almost like a Siri in your house. I personally think the Amazon Dash is a really interesting experiment I think they've done, which is this product that lives in your kitchen, and you just tell it, you pick it up and tell it what you've just run out of and what you need to buy next. And this is connected to Amazon's move into grocery shopping and grocery deliveries. And then of course the latest thing they've done, which was taking it down even further to the sort of device or product level. And, just sticking something on the washing machine, and when you run out of detergent, you just press that button, and the next shipment will have a box of detergent. And I think a lot of what I think is quite exciting about this is the sort of new user experience that this enables, right? So if you think about something like grocery online shopping, back 10, 15 years ago, that was something people in the UK, for example, did on their desktop, right? You have to log into the website and do all of these things and sit down at your computer and boot up the website and all of this stuff. And then we had the smartphone, and the app economy kind of came about, and this made a lot of things slightly faster and quicker. And I think what's really interesting with this Dash idea is it reduces the steps even more. It's now this thing that just lives in the right context, and you just pick it up when you need to. And it doesn't have a screen either. That's another interesting thing, because it doesn't really need one. And then lastly, I think sort of device ecosystem. So what I mean by that is companies that launch products that are sort of actually on a secret mission to make another product better. I think this is interesting when you think about Nest. They had the thermostat, and really what they needed to make the thermostat better is basically a sensor, a presence detection in every possible part of your house. But it's very hard to sell, right? To go, hey, buy this thing that will monitor you everywhere. So why not pick this thing that's already in many rooms of the house in America, which is the smoke alarm or the CO2 alarm, and actually really improve that as a sort of backdoor entry to actually improve your sensing networks, sensing that you have on is somebody in the house, and what are they doing and where are they? Something I saw yesterday at an IoT Week event here, which is sort of the similar thing, which I thought was really clever, is what this company Husqvarna is doing, or playing with, I guess, is actually using the battery of their tools as a way to massively improve all the tools you already have. So the battery could tap into the diagnostics port and use things like vibration monitoring and Bluetooth connectivity to relay all of this stuff into the network, into the cloud. But what's really clever about this is this sort of backdoor entry again. You can just buy this battery and stick it into all your existing products. So I guess you might wonder sort of what's any of this to do with design? I'll kind of apologize in advance because some of this might be slightly technical, but I hope you kind of appreciate it because there's quite a bit of complexity going on when you look at IoT. I guess one of the fundamental points we're trying to make in the book is that it's no longer just, you can't think of IoT as just UX design with a bit of industrial design or a physical product. There's actually lots of things that you have to think about, and they kind of, they're more or less visible to the end user, but they're all really important. They're all sort of things you have to cover up in your design projects, and in your design, the way you structure the design teams. And that's why the book, to give you a sort of glance at what some of the contents are, covers a variety of things from prototyping to cross-device interactions or industrial design, but also covers things like strategy and value proposition design, because that's, fundamentally nobody's going to buy your product if the interaction is brilliant and the UI is brilliant, if the fundamental value proposition is wrong, what doesn't really make sense, nobody's going to buy it. So that's why designers need to get much more involved in crafting that in the IoT world. I'll just dive into this a little bit for the next few slides. So if you think about the value proposition, what we talk about in the book is this idea of productization. So really working hard to craft and make sure you really nail down what the product actually does and why anybody should care. And again, I hate to dwell on this, but they do this really well, because when you look at the way they talk about the products, they actually don't really talk about connectivity or the sort of technical sides of it. They simply talk about why this is a better smoke alarm than the other smoke alarms you could buy in the shop, right? And so the fact that it's IoT or the fact that it's connected doesn't really matter. It just matters why it's actually better. And then there's the sort of different approach of building tools, I guess, like sort of connected switches, which is also valid and interesting, but they really put the onus on the user to sort of make sense of this stuff. So we see that as slightly more tech-savvy products that might not really go into mass market potentially, but we'll see. I guess, again, another example from Belkin, which is sort of on the other side again. It goes back to my earlier point. So this is a slow cooker, and if it's a very niche product that not many people might be familiar with. But if you have a slow cooker, it's actually really clever if you connect it to the internet and you can check on it from afar. So this is again this really clever idea of using connectivity to actually really improve this product, and the fact that it's IoT again doesn't really matter. So one of the things we talk about is the sort of question, like, are you building a product or are you building a tool? Which is something that really changes how you need to approach it and who you're designing this for. And design can help develop and focus this. So I'll just mention three or some methods that I've employed and that I think are really interesting. This is something we call media from the future. So what you can do very early on in a project like this, or in product development like this, without investing almost any money and barely any time, is, for example, things like create the press release for the thing you're trying to build before you even started building it. And that becomes your tool that you iterate, or your thing that you iterate on very quickly in order to actually really hone down and refine what the value proposition and why it is and why anybody should care. Similar things you could do is sort of pick a mainstream newspaper and imagine what the newspaper article in this paper might be about your product. Or another exercise I like to do with clients is getting them to sketch the packaging of the product, even though we don't really know what the product really is yet. And whether the product will be sold in retail doesn't really matter. It's more about using the packaging as a constraint because everybody understands packaging from going to the shop. So using that as a way to really define what the actual value proposition is. So then it gets slightly more technical when you think about what we call the conceptual model. So how do people make sense of the product and how it works? So if you have a non-connected product, that's quite simple. Tends to be quite simple. So if you take the example of a light, it's plugged into electricity, and there's a switch that turns it on or off. And if you add connectivity to that, things get more complex. So you might have the light plugged into electricity, but then it might be talking to a local gateway device, and you might have switches in your house that talk to this gateway. But then the gateway might also talk to the internet to enable things like an app to control the system. And why the conceptual model and thinking through this is really important, because your customers might start to see this when it starts to break, right? So, for example, two different approaches you could take in designing a product like this, right, is if I program my light to come on at a certain time, does this intelligence and these rules, do they run in the cloud? In which case, if my home internet connection goes down, nothing's going to happen at 8 p.m. Or do they run locally? In which case, everything's going to be fine, even though my internet's going to be down. So this is the kind of stuff that design will need to help make more transparent to the end users. And it's already kind of getting extra stuff that people have to, at the moment, the early adopters have to really think about. You're already looking at light bulbs alone. You've sort of seen LifeX that connect via Wi-Fi, so they don't need a hub. You have a Hue that use Zigbee, so they come with a hub to enable that. And then you have other light bulbs that also use Zigbee, so they require a hub, but they don't come with one. So it starts to get quite complex, and users have to have, need help and to sort of make sense of it. And some of the ways to do that is, for example, deciding how much you try to show what this conceptual model, or show a conceptual model, help your customer create a conceptual model to make sense of this. So, Apple's Airport app, for example, is really interesting. How they try to visualize how your home Wi-Fi and internet connection works, and then you can start to understand as a user where do things break. So Iris is an American home connected home platform, and what they do in the app, there's this green light that basically represents that the app can actually reach your home gateway device, and so only if there's a screen, the stuff you can do in the app actually works. If it's not green, then it's not going to do anything. Design can really help, I guess, develop a way to simplify this stuff just enough. And so one of the nicest examples we found is the automatic gearbox, right? It's a really clever way to sort of refine something that's quite complex, hide the complexity, but just keep it flexible enough for people to actually do the kind of things they need to do. And so then you go a step further into how to actually use it. What's the interaction model? And what we talk about there in the book is something we call interusability, which is sort of based on a really good paper that was published a couple of years ago. And so it talks about 3 things that you have to sort of address to create a coherent user experience for connected products. And there are composition, consistency, and continuity. And I'll just dive into what do I mean. So composition is sort of how you distribute the interface across different devices. And so here's 2 examples. Should we go back to this? Here's 2 examples of a connected thermostat. On the left, you've got Tado, which is a German brand, and then you've got British Gas Hive, the latest model. And so they took quite different approaches to composition. On the left, on the actual device in your house, there's sort of barely no buttons, right? There's sort of very rudimentary on and off and temperature up and down, and then the full richness of the functionality actually comes into the app, happens in an app. And then British Gas took a different approach where all of this is mirrored, and you can do everything you can do on the device, you can do in the app, and vice versa. And we're not saying that there is a right or wrong answer here. It's just this is the kind of decisions that you'll have to work through for your product. So, in this case, Talo have an advantage in the hardware, right? Because their physical device is much quicker and cheaper to create, and much quicker to market. But of course, they're really relying on you having a charged and connected smartphone. And they have potentially another advantage, which is it's much easier for them to iterate and refine the product because they don't have to worry about updating, potentially firmware on a lot of devices that are already deployed, or how they might retrofit existing physical controls into a new function or a new UI model you've developed. So consistency is the next one. And this is very familiar to people that worked in cross-platform design. So there's often the sort of tension between do you stay conform to platform conventions, or do you try to create consistency within your own product? So if you look at Spotify on an Android and an iOS, it's sort of similar in some ways between each other, but then there's things where it actually follows the iOS conventions and it follows the Android conventions, and that makes it more usable, right? That's the sort of stuff that I guess Jacob Nielsen talks about in his usability heuristics. But again, this might get more complicated with the sort of different types of device you have to account for. It might not be possible to actually, well, there might not be a sort of convention for a physical device, and you have to sort of think about how you create that consistency. One of the things we see as the sort of highest priority is the terminology. So making sure that the same actions or the same functions actually consistently use the same name. And this is not, this is not trivial, because you might have a physical device that's using a second display screen, where at the point of manufacturing you have to decide what this word is going to be for the foreseeable future. And then you have different, I guess, different development timelines and design teams that you have to think about. So this is an example from Berg about their little printer product. They've done a really nice job at kind of creating consistency in the color palette, in typography, in the terminology, in the hardware. But of course, this thing, these hardware things probably had to go into production way earlier than some of these decisions had actually been made. So one of the little workarounds they've done is they used a paper insert in the bridge device in order to actually defer that decision right to the very last day, and work on these consistencies, work on things like typography until the very last day. And then just one more Nest example. I promise it's the last one. So here you can see something they've done where there is consistency in a sort of visual sense, but of course the rotation of a bezel doesn't really translate to a touchscreen interaction. That doesn't really work. The rotational things are actually really poor to do on a touchscreen. So the changing the temperature on the app sort of looks similar, but actually works through tapping up and down. But one of the nice touches they've kept consistent was that the actual clicking noise that the bezel makes is also produced by the app, even though it obviously doesn't make that sound. And then the last one is continuity. So this is about the sort of point of picking up something on one device and moving to another. A simple example is you read a book on your iPhone and you go to your Kindle and it syncs to that page. But this is tricky in IoT because of two things. You've got latency and reliability, and then you might have a lot of battery power devices that actually only connect intermittently because they want to conserve battery power. And so this kind of makes this stuff tricky. So if you go back to this example of the connected lamp, what you effectively sort of have to think about as a designer is the sort of third in-between state between, I'm switching this lamp on, but I'm not actually sure if it's actually on yet. And this sort of in-between state. There's two ways of dealing with that, I guess. One way is you can just lie. So this is Instagram is a sort of app example that does this. Right? If you hit the like button on a photo, it's going to give you immediate feedback that everything's cool, and it's going to send this actual action in the background. And in a rare occasion, if it lost connection, you might go back to this photo an hour later and realize actually the like button isn't pressed because the thing didn't actually go through. And the question is, do you really want that to be your light in the house or your heating system to work like that? So what you tend to see there is the sort of other approach of making this third state more transparent. So with Wemo, what you see is feedback that my switch is on. And when I press it, it sort of goes into this new state, which could go up to a couple of seconds of yes, I'm trying to turn it off. Let's see if it works, and then actually yes, it's off. And I think this is stuff that isn't particularly sort of sexy, but I guess design needs to make that nicer. A slightly less useful example is again this slightly more geeky product Iris that where if you do an action, it sort of tells you, I'm sending the changes, please don't exit the app, and then it's confirming that it's actually done. And then to the second point about battery-powered devices. So this is another challenge you might find, which is, for example, in the UK, the heating controllers actually sitting on the boiler are often not mains powered, so they often run on battery, meaning that they tend to connect with something like every 2 minutes to the gateway to actually check for new instructions or updated data. And this creates a delay in the entire system that, from the kind of world of apps and internet, we don't really need to worry about that much. So in this case, this can be you're standing with your iPhone right in front of your heating system, and you're actually telling you 2 different temperatures for up to 2 minutes. And so again, design needs to kind of think about how you make that more compelling. If you showing the user that you've pressed something, but actually it's only going to actually happen in up to 2 minutes, or you're telling me a temperature reading that might be actually quite old, a couple of minutes old. So I want to end on just a few thoughts to leave everybody that's working in IoT and connected products with. And that's just to kind of remember that the sort of responsibility you have. So this is just some things I've seen recently, for example. So this is a connected CNC router. And what it does actually, it uses, it's quite impressive because it uses motors to effectively error correct your inability to be a good craftsman. So this is great. So with this product, you can be a perfect craftsman. And then you see, there's products like this appearing, the latest Thermomix product, which is connected and uses these things called recipe ships to enable everybody to sort of have guided cooking for guaranteed success. So everybody's a Michelin star chef now, I guess. And then there's the sort of slightly older example, and if you haven't read the book Everywhere from Adam Greenfield, I highly recommend this system, the stuff he talks about there. He talks about this elevator system that is using, I guess, smart functionality to sort of improve the time to destination. And the way it does it is the sort of, the conventional chaotic human way is everybody presses the button and waits, and everybody wants to go to a different floor. And only when you get into the elevator car, you actually press the floor you want to go on. And so what this company has done is actually taken that out of the elevator into the waiting room, right? And so everybody presses what button they want to be at, and the elevator system starts to decide, well, you guys should go into this car, and you guys will go into this car, and I'll make it better, more efficient for everybody. And what Alan Greenfield points out is the sort of, what goes missing in this is the sort of, you'll never bump into anybody randomly anymore, because the system's actually decided for you who you'll share the ride with. And there was another anecdote pointed out yesterday when I talked about this, that another side effect of this was you don't actually need any buttons in the car anymore, right? Because you've made your choice of where to go. And so apparently, allegedly, in the first kind of iterations of this, people start to sort of freak out because they go into the car and it's like, what's this? I'm in an elevator with no buttons. And then there was this report you might have seen about vending machines in Japan, sort of a company trying to exploring connectivity or smart features to improve vending machines by so instead of a glass, it has a big screen that shows all the products that you can get, and it uses a camera to identify the gender and rough age of people that come up to it. And so the vending machine can then suggest and sort of change what products it might show. So, from this article I found in the news, a woman in her 20s might be suggested a slightly more sweeter beverage because of her age and gender. So, again, this is a system that starts to sort of decide for you, I guess, what drink you should have. And I just wanted to sort of, I think it's always important to, when you work in connected products, sort of remember that this stuff will be affecting the physical world around us, your homes and the places you'll go to work in and the elevators you go to work in. And so it's really important to understand sort of what values we actually instill into these products, and whether they should just be efficiency and productivity, and or whether there should be other things that we need to kind of almost make sure they translate into this world of connected products. Yeah, so this is, I guess, just a few of the areas that design needs to address in IoT. And there's other, other things in the book as well. We talk about industrial design and more about the technical side that designers need to know about, and how you might go about prototyping things really early on to test these things. That's it. I've got one copy here as well that you can browse through, and we'll give it away, I think. I think we'll do this with a sort of prize draw method. So I hope everybody has a business card. And I'll give this through, or maybe write your name on something. And then we'll get somebody to draw the lucky winner.